The morning sun hadn't quite burned off the haze over the tarmac when he walked through the jet bridge. Backpack slung over one shoulder, earbuds dangling but silent. He looked like any other teenager. Hoodie, sneakers, eyes fixed on the ground, moving with the kind of calm that comes from not needing to prove anything to anyone. No flashy watch, no designer luggage, just a worn canvas bag and a boarding pass folded neatly in his hand. He'd flown plenty of times before, but never like this. Not since everything changed. Back then, flying meant squeezing into middle seats with his mom, sharing a bag of pretzels and pressing his forehead against the window just to watch the clouds. Now he could charter a private jet if he wanted. But he didn't. He liked normalcy. Liked blending in. Today he was just another passenger, except for the fact that his seat was 1A. Window side in first class, paid for in full with cash from an account most adults would never see in their lifetimes. As he stepped into the cabin, the flight attendant gave him a polite nod, eyes flicking over him quickly before returning to her clipboard. He smiled slightly, said good morning, and moved down the aisle. The first-class section was nearly empty. Just two other passengers, both older, both scrolling through tablets with the quiet entitlement of frequent flyers. He found 1A, slid his backpack under the seat and settled in, pulling out his phone. A few unread messages blinked on the screen. Updates from his team. A note from his younger sister asking if he'd be home for dinner. A reminder about a board meeting next week. Nothing urgent. He exhaled, leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment. Then came the click of heels. A woman in a tailored cream suit and oversized sunglasses appeared at the front of the cabin, rolling a sleek carry-on behind her. She paused, scanning the row numbers, then stopped directly across from him. Without a word, she dropped her bag into the overhead bin above his seat and turned to him. "That's my seat," she said, voice crisp, like she was stating a fact everyone should already know. He blinked, looked up. "I think you might be mistaken," he said gently. "I'm in 1A." She didn't smile. Didn't even glance at his boarding pass. "I upgraded at the gate," she said, pulling out her own pass like a badge. "They told me I'd be in 1A. He held up his ticket. "This says 1A, too." She narrowed her eyes, then looked past him, as if the seat itself might confirm her version of reality. "That can't be right," she muttered, more to herself than to him. Then louder. "You must have been assigned the wrong seat. These things happen with online check-in." He didn't argue, just held out his phone, showing the digital boarding pass with his name, flight number, and seat clearly marked, 1A. She glanced at it for half a second, then waved it off like it was a child showing a drawing. "Look," she said, voice dropping into that tone adults sometimes use when they think they're being reasonable, but are really just shutting someone down. "I paid extra for this upgrade. I have a meeting in New York. I need to be rested. You'll be fine in economy." He didn't move, not out of defiance, but because it simply didn't make sense. He'd paid for this seat.
He belonged here.
But before he could say anything else, she turned and flagged down a flight attendant. "Excuse me," she said, voice suddenly sweet. "There's been a mix-up. This young man is in my seat." The attendant, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and a practiced smile, approached. The woman handed over her boarding pass. He glanced at it, then at the boy's seat number, then at the boy himself. There was a pause. Just a second, but it was long enough. "Sir," the attendant said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that left no room for discussion, "would you mind moving to 23C? We've had a last-minute upgrade and there seems to be a double booking." The boy looked at him, really looked. Not with anger, but with something quieter. Disappointment, maybe, or just the weariness of having been here before in different forms. He'd been told he didn't belong in boardrooms, in elite schools, in tech conferences where people assumed he was staff, but on a plane, in a seat he'd paid for? Still, he nodded. "Sure," he said, voice steady. He stood, grabbed his backpack, and stepped into the aisle. The woman didn't thank him, didn't even look at him as she slid into 1A with a satisfied sigh, adjusting her scarf like she'd just won something small but important. As he walked back through the cabin, a few passengers watched. One older man gave him a sympathetic nod. A woman in row 12 started recording on her phone but quickly put it away when he passed. He kept his eyes forward, shoulders relaxed, expression neutral. But inside, something had shifted. He found 23C, a middle seat between a sleeping man and a woman with two toddlers. The armrests were sticky. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee. He sat down, placed his backpack on his lap, and opened his phone again. This time he didn't check messages. He typed one, took my seat. First class. They made me move. He hit send. 3 seconds later, his phone buzzed. Which airline? He replied with the name, another buzz almost instantly. Say nothing. Don't move. I'll handle it. He put the phone away and stared out the tiny window. Outside, ground crew moved with practiced efficiency. Fuel trucks rolled by. A bird landed on the wing, then took off again. Inside the cabin, the woman in 1A ordered a sparkling water from the attendant, who brought it with a small bow of his head. No one knew, not her, not the crew, not the passengers filming on their phones, that the teenager in 23C had built an app at 16 that now powered logistics for half the fortune. 500. That he'd turned down acquisition offers in the billions just to keep control. That he rarely flew first class not because he couldn't afford it, but because he preferred not to draw attention. But today, attention had found him anyway, and sometimes, when you've worked your whole life to be seen for your mind and not your skin, being told to move from a seat you paid for feels less like an inconvenience and more like a quiet echo of every time someone assumed you didn't belong. He didn't look angry, didn't raise his voice. But as the plane doors sealed shut and the engines began to hum, something deeper than frustration settled in his chest. Not rage, but resolve. He'd been polite. He'd complied. He'd done everything right. And yet, here he was, in the back of the plane, while someone who barely glanced at his ticket sat in his seat like it was hers by default. He closed his eyes again. Not to sleep, just to wait, because he knew, without doubt, that this flight wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. The plane began to roll backward from the gate with a low groan, the familiar tug of motion signaling they were finally on their way. Passengers relaxed into their seats, some pulling out books, others slipping on headphones. In first class, the woman sipped her sparkling water, already scrolling through emails on her tablet, the earlier seat dispute forgotten like a minor glitch in an otherwise smooth day. But in row 23, the boy stayed still. He didn't open a book or look at his phone again. He just watched out the window as the terminal shrank behind them, his expression unreadable. Around him, the cabin buzzed with the usual pre-takeoff murmur. Flight attendants giving safety instructions, babies fussing, someone laughing quietly a few rows back. Normal sounds. Normal moments, then without warning, the plane stopped. Not the gentle pause of waiting in line for the runway. This was abrupt. The engine softened to a hum. A flight attendant walking down the aisle stumbled slightly, catching herself on a seatback. Murmurs rose. What's happening? Someone asked. Maybe traffic on the runway, another guessed. But minutes passed. Then 10, then 15. No announcement came. People started checking their watches, glancing at overhead screens, whispering to neighbors. In first class, the woman frowned, tapping her screen impatiently. Then the intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We've been asked to return to the gate for an urgent operational matter. Please remain seated. A collective sigh rippled through the cabin. Groans. Eye rolls. One man muttered, "Here we go again." But the boy didn't react. He simply sat up a little straighter, as if he'd been expecting this all along. Outside, the plane turned slowly, taxiing back toward the terminal. Ground crew looked confused, waving less enthusiastically than before. As they neared the gate, 2 men in dark suits and 1 woman in a crisp airline blazer rushed onto the jet bridge, speaking urgently into headsets. They didn't wait for the stairs to fully connect. They were on board before the engines had fully powered down. The lead executive, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a face that said she hadn't slept in 36 hours, walked straight to the front of the cabin. She didn't greet the crew, didn't smile. She leaned down and whispered something to the flight attendant who'd asked the boy to move. His face went pale. He nodded quickly, then pointed toward the back of the plane. The executive turned. Her eyes scanned the economy section, row by row, until they landed on him. She walked back slowly, heels clicking against the carpeted floor. Passengers watched, sensing something unusual but not sure what. When she reached row 23, she stopped. "Sir," she said, voice low but clear. "My name is Evelyn Cho. I'm the Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for this airline. I'd like to personally apologize for what happened today." He looked up at her, didn't stand. Didn't smile. Just waited. "We've reviewed your booking," she continued. "Your seat assignment was correct. There was no double booking. The upgrade issued to the other passenger was processed in error, and our staff failed to verify it properly before asking you to relocate." A few nearby passengers exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "Wow," she took a breath. "We would be honored if you'd return to your original seat. And we've asked the other passenger to deplane while we conduct an internal review." He didn't answer right away. He just looked past her toward the front of the plane, where the woman in the cream suit now stood in the aisle, arguing with another executive, her voice rising. "I paid for that seat," she insisted. "You can't just throw me off the plane because some kid is upset." The boy finally stood. Not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly, like someone rising from a chair after a long meeting. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and nodded to Evelyn. "Thank you," he said. As he walked forward, the cabin fell quiet. Not the hushed silence of fear, but the kind that comes when people realize they're witnessing something real. Something that doesn't happen every day. Heads turned. Phones came out again, but this time no one tried to hide them. When he reached first class, the woman was still protesting. "This is ridiculous." "Do you know who I am?" Evelyn stepped between them. "Ma'am, we've explained the situation. For the safety and comfort of all passengers, we must ask you to disembark. But my meeting, your ticket will be fully refunded, and we'll rebook you on the next available flight." The woman's face flushed. She grabbed her bag, shot the boy a look that mixed disbelief and something sharper, maybe shame, maybe resentment, and stormed down the aisle. No one clapped. No one cheered. But as the door closed behind her, a quiet sense of relief settled over the cabin. The boy returned to 1A. This time, the flight attendant who'd asked him to move stood nearby, hands clasped, eyes downcast. "I'm so sorry, sir," he said, voice barely above a whisper. The boy just nodded. "It's okay." And he meant it. Not because what happened was acceptable, but because holding on to anger wouldn't change it. What mattered now was what came next. Back in the cockpit, the captain received another message. Not from operations this time, but from corporate headquarters. "Do not depart until further notice. Legal and PR teams are en route." Meanwhile, on the ground, the story was already spreading. A passenger in row 12 had posted a short clip online, just 10 seconds. The boy standing in the aisle, the woman insisting the seat was hers, the attendant asking him to move. The caption read, "Teen asked to give up first-class seat he paid for. Watch what happens next." Within minutes, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in. "Why did they make him move? He looks like he belongs there. Bet they wouldn't have done that if he was white. No one knew who he was yet." Not really. But the video tapped into something familiar. Something many had felt but rarely seen addressed so directly. By the time the airline's social media team caught wind of it, the post had gone viral. Their inbox flooded with messages. News outlets started calling. Inside the plane, none of that noise reached the cabin. The boy sat quietly, staring out the window again. But this time he wasn't waiting. He was thinking about how often this kind of thing happened. Small moments of dismissal, of being overlooked, of having to prove you belong over and over again. About how most people just walk away, swallow it, move on. But what if you didn't have to? What if you had the power to say, "This stops here"? He didn't want a scene, didn't want revenge, but he also knew that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to make it impossible to ignore. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the tarmac, the grounded plane sat like a silent statement. No engines running, no destination in sight. Just a cabin full of witnesses and one quiet truth. Respect shouldn't be conditional, and sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stay seated. The plane sat motionless at the gate, its engines silent, the cabin caught in that strange limbo between departure and delay. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on the tarmac, glinting off the wings. Inside, the air felt heavier. Not from heat, but from the quiet tension humming beneath the surface. Passengers checked their phones more often now, not out of boredom, but because something was happening and they could feel it in their bones. News had spread faster than anyone expected. A short clip, just a few seconds of a teenager being asked to give up his seat, had exploded online. At first, it was shared in small circles, a tech forum, a college group chat, a community page for frequent flyers. But then a journalist picked it up. Then a news anchor. Then a celebrity with millions of followers reposted it with a single line. This is why representation matters. By the time the airline's corporate office realized what was unfolding, the hashtag Seat1A was trending nationwide. Back on board, the boy remained calm. He hadn't spoken to reporters, hadn't posted anything himself. He just sat in 1A, eyes on the window, occasionally glancing at his phone as messages poured in, not from fans or strangers, but from people who knew him, who worked with him, who understood the weight of what had just occurred. One text stood out. They're scrambling. Board's an emergency session. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He'd never wanted this kind of attention, but he also knew that silence wouldn't fix what happened. Not this time. Meanwhile, chaos unfolded behind the scenes. At the airline's headquarters, executives huddled in a conference room usually reserved for quarterly earnings calls. Voices were raised. Fingers pointed. Someone pulled up the passenger manifest again, double-checking the name next to seat 1A, then froze. They ran a quick search. And then another. Within minutes, the room went quiet, because they realized who he was. Not just a kid with a first-class ticket. Not just a well-dressed teenager who happened to be in the right place. This was the founder of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. A company that had quietly become essential to global supply chains, logistics, even emergency response systems. A company valued in the billions. A company that until today had flown under the radar by design, and that company had a major contract with the airline's parent corporation, worth over $200 million. Panic set in. Calls were made. Lawyers were looped in. A crisis team assembled. Within the hour, a formal apology draft was circulating, but it was already too late. The internet had moved faster than their legal department ever could. On board the plane, passengers began to notice something unusual. Flight attendants were whispering in corners. The captain came out of the cockpit twice, speaking in hushed tones with Evelyn Cho, the executive who'd apologized earlier. Then a new announcement crackled over the intercom. Not the usual polite delay notice, but something more deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, we deeply regret the disruption to your travel plans. Due to an internal review, this flight will remain grounded for the remainder to the day. We will be rebooking all passengers on alternative flights at no cost and providing meal vouchers and hotel accommodations as needed. Again, we sincerely apologize. A wave of groans and sighs followed, but also a strange sense of understanding. People weren't angry, not really. Most had seen the video by now. Many had even shared it. They knew this wasn't just about a seat. It was about fairness, about dignity, about what happens when assumptions override facts. One woman in business class turned to her seatmate and said, "Honestly, I'm glad they're taking it seriously." In the back, a college student whispered to her friend, "I hope he's okay." But the boy wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about the ripple effect. How one moment, small, personal, almost invisible, could expose something much larger. How systems built on routine and habit often fail to see the people moving through them unless someone forces them to look. Eventually, airline staff began escorting passengers off the plane, guiding them to customer service desks where rebooking lines stretched down the terminal. The boy was among the last to leave. Evelyn met him at the door. "We've arranged a private car to take you wherever you need to go," she said. "And if you're willing, we'd appreciate the chance to speak with you directly. Not as a passenger, as a partner." He considered this, then nodded. "I'll talk. But not today." She didn't press. Just handed him a card. "Whenever you're ready." He walked through the terminal alone, backpack over his shoulder, hood up slightly against the glare of overhead lights. People recognized him now, not by face, but by the story. A few nodded respectfully. One older man gave him a thumbs up. He didn't react much, just kept walking, eyes forward. Outside, the car waited. Black, unmarked driver holding the door. As he slid into the back seat, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was his younger sister. "Did you see the news?" she texted. "Everyone's talking about you." He typed back, "I just wanted to get to New York." She replied instantly, "Well, you got there. In the weirdest way possible." He smiled for the first time all day. Back at the airport, cleanup continued. The flight crew involved in the incident was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Internal emails were flagged. Training protocols were pulled for review, and in a quiet corner of the operations center, someone printed out the company profile of the boys' tech firm, highlighting every point of contact, every shared project, every dollar at stake. By nightfall, the airline's CEO issued a public statement. It wasn't the usual corporate fluff. It was direct. "We failed to uphold our values today," it read. "We allowed bias, conscious or not, to override procedure. We are committed to real change, not just words." The next morning, headlines told the full story. Not just the seat, not just the grounding, but the aftermath, the terminated contract, the policy overhaul, the national conversation it sparked. And through it all, the boy stayed out of the spotlight. He didn't give interviews, didn't post selfies with captions about justice. He went back to work, back to his routines, back to being the person he'd always been, just with one difference. Now when he walked into a room, people didn't just see a young black man in a hoodie. They saw someone who'd quietly changed the rules, just by refusing to move. By the time the plane was scheduled to land in New York, the story had already landed everywhere else. News vans camped outside the airline's headquarters. Talk shows debated it over coffee and graphics. Online, the clip had been viewed millions of times, not because it was dramatic, but because it felt so painfully ordinary. That was the part that stuck with people, how routine it all seemed. A kid shows his ticket. An adult assumes he's wrong. Staff sides with the adult. The kid moves. End of story. Except this time it wasn't. What made it different wasn't the confrontation. It was the silence that followed. The way he didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't make a scene. He just walked back, sat down, and let the system reveal itself, and reveal itself it did. Within 48 hours, the fallout was everywhere. The airline's stock dipped. Their customer service lines flooded. Their social media pages became battlegrounds between those demanding accountability and those calling it overblown. But the real blow came from the business side. When word got out that a major tech company, quiet, powerful, and deeply embedded in global infrastructure, had severed ties over the incident, other corporate partners started asking questions. Not loud ones, just quiet, careful ones, like, could this happen to us? The boy didn't attend the emergency board meetings, didn't sit in on the press strategy calls. He was back in his office by the second day, reviewing code updates and approving a new education initiative his company was funding in underserved schools. But his team handled the rest with precision. No grand statements, no emotional press releases, just a clean, firm email to the airline's legal department. Effective immediately, all active contracts between our organizations are terminated. We do not partner with companies whose actions contradict our values. It wasn't revenge. It was alignment. Meanwhile, the woman who'd taken his seat disappeared from public view. She wasn't named in official reports, privacy policies protected her, but rumors swirled. Some said she worked in finance. Others claimed she'd been fired from her job after her company saw the video. None of it was confirmed, and the boy never asked. He didn't care what happened to her. What mattered was what happened next, for everyone else. Schools began using the incident as a case study. Not in law classes or business ethics, but in middle school homerooms and high school assemblies. Teachers played the clip, short, grainy reel, and asked students, "What would you have done?" The answers surprised them. Kids talked about times they'd been doubted because of how they dressed, how they spoke, what they looked like. One student said, "I got stopped in a store last week just for looking at sneakers, like I was going to steal them." Another said, "My teacher thought I cheated on a test because I got the highest score in class. Said it didn't make sense." The boy's story became a mirror, and then came the invitations, not for interviews, not for red carpets, but for classrooms, community centers, youth tech camps. At first, his team declined them all. He wasn't a spokesperson. He wasn't trying to be a symbol. But after a letter arrived from a group of students in Detroit, handwritten, taped together with a drawing of a plane and a stick figure in seat 1A, he changed his mind. He agreed to speak. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, but as someone who'd been told more than once that he didn't belong, and kept showing up anyway. His first talk was at a public library in Chicago. No stage, no podium, just him, a folding chair, and 20 teenagers sitting on the floor. He didn't mention money, didn't talk about deals or valuations. He talked about being 16 and pitching his app to investors who asked if his dad helped write the code. About walking into meetings where people assumed he was the intern. About how exhausting it is to constantly prove your worth when others get the benefit of the doubt by default. One girl raised her hand. Did you ever think about just not dealing with it? Like staying low, keeping quiet? He nodded. All the time. But then I realized staying quiet doesn't protect you. It just lets the problem keep happening to someone else. That talk wasn't recorded, wasn't posted online. But the kids told their friends, and their friends told teachers. And soon more requests came, not for fame, but for truth. Back at the airline, change moved slower but deeper. Mandatory anti-bias training was rolled out for all customer-facing staff. Not the old online modules that people clicked through while watching TV, but real simulations, role-playing scenarios where employees had to navigate situations like the one on the plane. Supervisors were trained to spot microaggressions, not just overt racism. And for the first time, passenger complaints involving potential bias were flagged for immediate executive review. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The boy watched these changes from a distance. He didn't demand them, didn't negotiate them, but he noticed. And when the airline's CEO reached out personally, apologizing not just for the incident but for years of systemic oversight, he listened. They spoke for nearly an hour, not as adversaries but as people trying to fix something broken. Still, he didn't reinstate the contract. Not yet. Actions speak louder, he told his team. Let's see if they mean it. As weeks passed, the headlines faded. New stories took over, but the impact lingered. In policy changes, in classroom conversations, in the way flight attendants now double-checked seat assignments before asking anyone to move, and in the quiet moments, like when a young black boy boarded a plane and sat in first class without a second glance from anyone. The world had shifted, just a little. The boy never wanted to be a lesson. He just wanted to fly home. But sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin with a single seat, and the courage to stay in it. Months passed, and the noise faded. The news cycle moved on. The hashtag stopped trending. The airline's apology disappeared from front pages, replaced by new scandals, new crises, new stories demanding attention. But in the quiet spaces, the classrooms, the boardrooms, the airport gates, the ripples from that one grounded flight kept spreading. The boy never became a celebrity.
He didn't want to be.
He still wore hoodies, still carried the same worn backpack, still preferred late-night coding sessions to red carpets. But something had shifted. Not in him, but in how the world saw him, and more importantly, how it saw people who looked like him. He wasn't just a kid in a first-class seat anymore. He'd become a quiet reminder that dignity doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Schools kept inviting him to speak, and slowly he said yes, not to give speeches, but to sit in circles with students and just talk. No scripts, no agendas, just real conversation. He told them about failing his first coding project, about being told his ideas were too ambitious, about how he used to delete his emails before sending them because he worried his words wouldn't sound professional enough. The kids listened, not because he was rich, but because he sounded like someone who'd walked the same halls they had. One afternoon, after a talk at a community center in Atlanta, a 13-year-old boy hung back as the others left. He waited until the room was almost empty, then walked up, eyes down, voice barely above a whisper. Did you ever feel like, no matter how hard you try, people still see you as less? The boy, now more man than kid though still young, looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. Every day, he said. But that doesn't mean you stop showing up. It just means you show up for yourself, not for their approval. The younger boy smiled just a little and walked away with his head a little higher. That moment never made the news. Never went viral. But it mattered more than any headline. Back in the tech world, things changed too. Investors started asking different questions, not just about profit margins, but about company culture, about inclusion, about who gets a seat at the table. Other young founders, especially those who didn't fit the usual mold, began speaking up more, knowing someone had already cleared a little space for them. One startup founder said in an interview, "After what happened on that plane, I stopped apologizing for taking up space. Even the airline began to reflect the shift. 6 months after the incident, they released a full transparency report detailing every customer complaint involving bias, every staff retraining session, every policy revised. It wasn't perfect, critics pointed out gaps, but it was honest. And for the first time, they included input from external civil rights organizations, not just internal PR teams. The boy read the report carefully. Then he sent a short email to his leadership team. Let's consider re-engaging. Not full partnership yet, but a pilot program. Let's test if they've changed. It wasn't forgiveness. It was accountability with a chance to prove itself. Meanwhile, his own company grew, not just in size, but in purpose. He launched a new initiative funding tech labs in public schools across the country, with a focus on districts that had never seen a single venture capital dollar. He insisted the labs be run by local teachers, not outside consultants. They know their students, he told his team. We just provide the tools. He also quietly funded a legal aid program for travelers who'd faced discrimination on flights, offering free support, not just for lawsuits, but for filing formal complaints, navigating corporate responses, and getting fair treatment. He never put his name on it. Just called it Seat 1A Project. Those who knew, knew. But perhaps the most surprising change happened in the air. Flight attendants began double-checking seat assignments with more care. Gate agents asked fewer assumptions, more questions. Passengers started speaking up when they saw something unfair, politely, firmly, like they'd learned from watching someone else do it first. And on more than one occasion, when a young person, black, brown, female, differently abled, boarded first class, no one batted an eye. It wasn't magic. It was momentum. One evening, the boy boarded another flight, this time to San Francisco.
Same airline.
Same class. As he walked down the aisle, the lead flight attendant recognized him immediately. She didn't fawn, didn't over-apologize. She just smiled, nodded, and said, "Welcome back, sir. Your seat's ready." He thanked her and sat down. No drama, no tension. Just a normal boarding, like it should have been all along. As the plane lifted off, he looked out the window at the city lights shrinking below. He thought about how much had changed. Not because he'd demanded a spotlight, but because he'd refused to shrink himself. He hadn't shouted, hadn't posted angry rants, hadn't even wanted the world to know who he was. He'd just asked quietly to be treated like anyone else. And in doing so, he'd reminded everyone that respect isn't earned by wealth or status. It's owed by default. Back home, his sister teased him over dinner. "You're kind of a legend now, you know." He rolled his eyes. "I'm just a guy who builds apps." "But you made people think," she said, stirring her soup. "Like really think," he didn't answer. But later that night, as he scrolled through messages from students, teachers, even former airline employees thanking him for sparking change, he realized something. Impact doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it starts with staying seated when you're told to move, and sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply exist, fully, unapologetically, and exactly where you belong. A year after the flight that never left the gate, the story had settled into something quieter than headlines, something deeper. It wasn't talked about in breaking news segments anymore, but it lived in small, everyday moments, like the high school in Cleveland that named its new coding lab Seat 1A after a student-led vote, or the airline employee who, during a training session, shared how that incident changed the way she saw her own assumptions, or the mother who told her son, "If someone ever tells you you don't belong somewhere you paid for, remember that boy on the plane. You don't have to prove your worth twice." The boy himself had returned to his rhythm. Early mornings, late nights, whiteboards covered in equations, coffee gone cold. He still avoided interviews, still turned down magazine covers. But he'd started saying yes to something new, mentorship. Not the polished kind with press releases, but the messy, real kind. Weekly Zoom calls with students from underfunded schools, handwritten notes to young founders who reached out, even showing up unannounced at a robotics competition in Houston just to watch. He didn't do it for credit. He did it because someone once told him his ideas were cute for a kid, and he remembered how that felt, like being patted on the head instead of taken seriously. Now he made sure others didn't have to carry that weight alone. One rainy afternoon, he received an unexpected visitor at his office. It was the flight attendant, the one who'd asked him to move that day. He recognized him instantly, though the man looked older now, tired in a different way. He didn't come with excuses. Just a letter, folded neatly, and a request to speak. They sat in a small meeting room with no cameras, no assistants, just 2 chairs and a window overlooking the city. The attendant spoke first. "I've replayed that moment in my head every day since," he said, voice low. "I didn't think I was being unfair. I thought I was keeping things smooth, making the flight run on time, avoiding conflict. But I chose convenience over truth. And that's on me." The boy listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't offer empty comfort. "I went through the retraining," the attendant continued. "Not just the required modules, but extra sessions. I even joined a bias awareness group with other crew members. We talk about the little things, the glances, the tones, the snap judgments we don't even realize we're making." He paused. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to say I see it now, and I'm trying to do better." The boy nodded. "That's all anyone can do," he said. "See it. Then change it." They talked for nearly an hour, about pressure, about fear of making mistakes, about how systems make it easy to follow the path of least resistance. Before leaving, the attendant handed him the letter. Inside was a simple note: "Thank you for making me look in the mirror." That night, the boy didn't post about it. Didn't tell his team. He just tucked the letter into his desk drawer, a reminder that change isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet conversation in a rainy office. Meanwhile, the ripple effects kept growing in ways no one predicted. A major university revised its admissions interview training after a professor used the incident as a case study in unconscious bias. A national retail chain updated its customer service policy to include assumption audits, checking whether staff treat customers differently based on appearance. Even airport security began piloting a new protocol where officers were trained to verify claims before acting on them, not just assume who looks like they belong. None of it mentioned the boy by name, but all of it carried his echo. He noticed it most when he traveled. Not because people recognized him, most didn't, but because the air felt different. Less tension, less performance. When he boarded a flight now, no one glanced twice at his hoodie or his backpack. Gate agents checked his ticket without hesitation. Flight attendants greeted him like any other passenger. It wasn't special treatment. It was equal treatment. And that, he realized, was the real victory. Still, he stayed cautious. He knew progress wasn't permanent, knew that one moment of clarity didn't erase decades of ingrained habits. So he kept building, not just apps, but bridges. His company launched a fellowship for first-generation college students in tech, with full tuition, housing, and mentorship. He insisted it be called the Belonging Program, not after him, but after the feeling he'd fought so hard to protect. Applications poured in from every state. Kids wrote essays about being the only one who looked like them in their AP computer science class, about being told their dreams were too big, about wanting to build things that mattered, not just chase money. He read every single one. One stood out. A girl from rural Mississippi wrote, "I've never met anyone who looks like me working in tech, but after I saw what happened on that plane, I realized maybe I don't have to wait for permission. Maybe I just have to show up." He approved her application on the spot. Back in the public eye, the airline had done more than just apologize. They'd partnered with civil rights groups to co-design their new training. They published quarterly reports on passenger complaints, including demographic data. And in a move that surprised even critics, they created a passenger advisory council made up of people from communities historically overlooked in travel, and gave them real power to shape policy. It wasn't perfect. There were still missteps, still complaints. But they were listening now. Really listening, and the boy. He watched from a distance, not as a judge, but as someone who understood that change is a process, not a finish line. One evening, he received a call from a documentary filmmaker. Not the flashy kind, but a quiet storyteller who'd spent years documenting everyday acts of courage. She wanted to make a short film, not about him, but about the idea of belonging in spaces that weren't built for you. She asked if he'd be willing to appear, just briefly, as one thread in a larger tapestry. He hesitated, then said yes, but only if the focus stayed on others. On the students, the workers, the travelers who'd faced the same quiet battles. The film, when it released months later, opened with footage of an empty airplane seat, 1A, bathed in morning light. No names, no narration, just the sound of a boarding announcement and the soft click of a seatbelt fastening. It won awards, not for drama, but for truth. As the year turned, the boy found himself reflecting less on what happened and more on what came after. He'd never wanted to be a symbol. But if his story helped even one person feel seen, then it was worth the attention he never asked for. He still flew coach sometimes just to stay grounded. Still coded in silence. Still ate takeout at his desk. But now, when he walked into a room full of executives or investors, he didn't brace for doubt. He walked in like he belonged because he did. And because he'd proven that belonging isn't granted by others, it's claimed by showing up again and again exactly as you are. One last thing happened that year, small but meaningful. The airline quietly retired the aircraft involved in the incident. Not as punishment, but as tribute. They donated it to a youth aviation program, where kids from underserved communities learn to build, maintain, and eventually fly planes. On the side of the fuselage near the front door, they painted a simple phrase in clean, bold letters. Your seat is yours. No name. No date, just those 4 words. The boy saw a photo of it online. He didn't comment. Didn't share it. But he saved it to his phone. Because sometimes the most powerful endings aren't grand speeches or dramatic showdowns. They're quiet acknowledgments that things can be different, and that one person's refusal to move can make space for everyone else to rise.